So I don't make a habit of making videos, but this one just had too many images for a post, so video it is. The question for today comes from Elined, tagged in the post below, and that request was: can you do a thing on dwarves and their fear of sky and why that could have been a legit thing? So, here we go. Dwarves and a fear of the sky. Why are dwarves afraid of falling into the sky? Well, the short answer is of course because that is actually entirely possible. But a longer answer is in order, and so to answer this, I'm going to take a moment to let anyone who has not played the Descent DLC and does not want the spoilers to back out. We're also going to be covering Dragon Age Origins, so if that's new to you as well and you don't want spoilers for that, go ahead and leave. I'll wait. Alright, so moving on. Exhibit A here has to be the Wellspring. This is the part within the Titan in the Descent DLC where Valta gets magic and the Inquisitor and their party have to fight the Rock Wraith or Guardian. I say Rock Wraith here because that's the standard Dwarven mythology for it, but we actually find out in Descent that these Rock Wraiths are controlled by the Titans, so whichever name you prefer. They're ultimately actually just the same thing. I've mentioned this in one of my lore posts before, but the entire Wellspring is lit up. We have trees and growth. If you're listening while you're in there, there's actually birds. So this is not just a hole underground, but an entire ecosystem. Most important to the current topic, though, is the background in these pictures, the part beyond the Wellspring Shrine where you're fighting the Rock Wraith and the Guardian. We can see from these images that the light within the Wellspring comes from somewhere further back, and that the pillars on which these houses are built are in fact surrounded by clouds. The light is in the distance, not from the shrine, and it's more or less sunlight, so let's just call it sunlight. We could spend all day trying to work out the whys of this, believe me, I actually could and have before, but to sum up the point, here we have sunlight, clouds, and birdsong. This is sky. This dwarven city within the Titan at the Wellspring is built on the sky. So let's take a moment to consider the codex that we actually get in-game for the Wellspring. I'm going to read it here, you can read it on screen with me, whatever you like. In a time that only the stone remembers, there was a Tig in the deepest caverns, ruled by a wise old king. The riches in the stone had provided well for the Tig. Lyrium flowed like water from the ground, gold and jewels sprouted from the walls like mushrooms, and the people wanted for nothing. One day the king returned to the stone and left behind 2 sons to vie for his throne. Neither have been named heir, so each sought to prove to their father's assembly that he was the best suited to be king. The first son journeyed far and wide across the deep roads, forging alliances with the other Tigs, and returned home bearing word of the goodwill of distant kingdoms and their promises of future friendship. But the assembly was not impressed with words and promises, and would not name him heir. So the second son mined the ground for wealth. Every last scrap of lyrium, every nugget of gold he dug up and gifted to the Tig. But the assembly, accustomed to abundance, was not impressed, so the second son dug farther and farther into the stone, so far that he broke through to the other side and found the sky. And this he claimed for his Tig, and the assembly named him king. But the assembly wanted him to bring back his treasure for the Tig. The new king climbed down and down the endless mine, until he reached the sky. But try as he might, he could not pull the sky up, nor strike it to pieces with his pickaxe. The new king mined out more and more earth, trying to carve a path to the sky, and finally he undermined his Tig so much that the whole kingdom broke loose and fell far, far into the ground, and up into the sky. King, assembly, and Tig were never seen again. From The King Who Claimed the Sky, from Songs That Only Nugs Can Hear by Paragon Ebrian. Paragon Ebrian's Songs That Only Nugs Can Hear dates back to 584 Exalted, according to other examples from the same material. There's one of those on the Nug Codex on the wiki, and it's listed there. To put that in a bit of perspective, let's take a look at the general goings-on of the Exalted Age at the time. So it was called the Exalted Age by Divine Justinia II, as a reference to the ongoing exalted marches against Tevinter, but we'll find out that within 10 years the last of those has come to an end, more or less exactly as they began. No territory was really gained or lost, so it's basically a waste of everyone's time. Calenhad is born in Highever in 510 Exalted as well. This would be intriguing news if it wasn't entirely overshadowed by the waking of Andoril and the kick-off of the Fourth Blight. At some point in there, Divine Justinia kicked the bucket. Her successor, Divine Hortensia, is pretty quick to follow, probably because there's an old god dragon rampaging around the Free Marches, or maybe just because she's getting old. Anyway, in 524, the Elven Warden Garahel and his griffin Crookytail take on Andoril at the Battle of Aisley. Garahel wins, and dies, and the Fourth Blight is ended. By 525, all of the griffins are extinct, according to lore. We actually think that there are eggs somewhere, and those of you who've read Last Flight are actually aware of this. Things are a bit boring until 537, when the Van Markham dynasty comes to power in Navarra after killing the sitting Pentagast king. For those of you who are wondering, the Van Markhams and the Pentagasts are a little bit like Romeo and Juliet's Montagues and Capulets, except that they eventually marry into one another's families, and the current Pentagast regime stems from that union, so go Cassandra. In 542, Ferelden actually succeeds in becoming a country, and this is relevant to Orzammar since Ferelden and Orlais are its two biggest trading partners, especially with the deep roads closed to all but the Legion of the Dead. Things are starting to settle a little bit on the surface now. In 571, Divine Rosamund dies, which is a shame because she's considered to be the nicest divine they have ever managed to have. Her successor, Divine Amara III, is best remembered for her penchant for burning people. She gets replaced by Divine Theodosia I pretty quickly. Obviously in 584, our songs only Nugs can hear is out and about with its strange tales of falling into the sky and its batty Nug haikus. Here's an example on screen. We round off the Exalted Age with the murder of Queen Madrigal and Antiva, possibly the most intriguing Theodosian cold case around, subject of many a play of entertainment. Divine Theodosia I wakes up after having an awful nightmare and promptly declares the Steel Age going forward. So why does this matter? Well, to put it into perspective, Orzammar's main trading partners are either at war or recovering from war throughout most of this century. The Blight and the Exalted Marches have made the situation in Orlais potentially less than favourable. Meanwhile, Ferelden is still trying to work out how to be a unified country. On the one hand, the lack of surface trade with Orlais, Ferelden and the Free Marches means that dwarves suffer food shortages, which is actually one of the results of the War of the Lions in Orlais that takes place just prior to and during Inquisition. You can listen to the Dwarven ambassadors in the Winter Palace if you're seeking any information about this at all. There's also references to it in the Descent, so if you do the Descent prior to the Winter Palace, you'll hear it. On the other hand, though, war is actually really good for the dwarves. Their main export is lyrium, and you're going to want lyrium if you are fighting Alamari clans, the Darkspawn in a Blight, or Tevinter Magisters in Exalted Marches. Given all that was going on, it stands to reason some people down in Orzammar might be thinking that going topside and getting into the lyrium trade would be a really good idea. The reason that this matters is because there is really only one thing that we reliably know about the Dwarven lore, and that is that it is almost entirely lies. The Shaperate, where the memories are recorded, is a propaganda machine. In fact, Valta gets kicked out because she refused to alter records to help a political claim. We know that the Titans are actually written out of the memories entirely, and so everything that we have about the concept of Titans, the sky under the ground, and Dwarven lore is more or less propaganda. And this matters, and it matters because of a very simple fact. Crowd control. The masses might very well flee to the surface. That lyrium trade looks mighty appealing to castless dwarves who are not able to make anything of themselves down in Orzammar, and who have, for the most part, ties to the Carter, which is predominantly a lyrium smuggling operation. So, time for a quick time-out to go over the Dwarven caste system and the situation down under the surface. Centuries of fighting the Darkspawn has significantly decreased potency, meaning far fewer babies are born to upper caste women. Upper caste men among the nobility, smith and warrior castes live and die by the sword battling the Darkspawn, and because of this, there is a bit of a population problem. How do you keep casteless dwarves from running, and why do you even want to? Well, the why is easy, and to thoroughly understand it, we're going to go through the caste system for those of you who've missed out on some of the lore. The caste system is basically the tiers by which anyone can do anything in Orzammar. It exists solely for the purpose of delineating who is important and who is not. There are several castes: nobles, warriors, smiths, merchants, servants, and then the casteless. If you are a surface dwarf, you are actually casteless, no ifs, ands, or buts. But the Merchants Guild does like to occasionally pretend that they have their own classes that matter, and this is why Varric here can't marry Bianca. At the top of the heap are the Paragons, so-called living ancestors. The Paragons are the dwarves represented by all of those statues in Dwarven corridors, and they are literally the greatest a dwarf can be, and someone that everyone should aspire to become. Their family is instantly made into a noble house, and they outrank even the Dwarven kings. Basically, to become a paragon, the assembly has to vote you in because you did something absolutely amazing. Branca, for instance, made smokeless coal, and Caradon built massive architectural feats, and of course, Ebrian wrote awful nug poetry. Other paragons have cut out their tongues to argue for women's rights in the warrior caste, saved entire taigs from Darkspawn, and found out that you can actually eat nugs, thereby saving the dwarves from starvation. Who knew? But if you're casteless, though, this is probably entirely unlikely to happen, unless, of course, you join the Grey Wardens and then go off and kill an archdemon to end the blight. Then you might get lucky. Aside from that, you're limited by your caste. Smiths become smiths. Nobles are always noble. Servants take pride in serving. And the casteless? Well, let's talk for a minute about the casteless. Any dwarf can be made casteless if they commit a crime, and this sentence goes for their entire house and all their descendants. They're stricken from the memories, which means erased from existence, and are worth basically nothing. This includes all surface dwarfs. In fact, the only thing you really have going for you as a casteless dwarf is that you can make babies a lot easier, because you are not allowed to go and fight the Darkspawn unless you join the Legion of the Dead. If you are casteless, you have only a few options open to you. The first is trying for the surface and see what a life you can make up there. Most end up in the Carter up there, though few can make a real life for themselves as either a merchant or a farmer. They do have families up there and children. We'll get back to the option of running to the surface in a minute. Let's say that you decide to stay instead. Well, if you're female, you have two choices now. You can join the Carter and potentially get killed doing thug work, or you can become a noble hunter by capitalizing on your fertility and trying your hardest to have babies for noblemen. If you are a man, you're pretty much stuck down in the Carter and that's it. Let's take a look at the concept of the noble hunter in a bit more detail by way of an example to better understand the caste system in general. Let's say your name is Rika Broska. You're a pretty casteless dwarf, born to a drunk and abusive mother who has a little sibling to care for. You're bad at fighting, and so you really have only one option for yourself. Find someone willing to buy a nice dress, and then get out in the business of making babies with someone of a higher caste. You know the nobles are looking for sons to deal with that whole population issue that they're having. So you get all dolled up in your nicest borrowed surface of silk gown, and you wander on up to the Diamond Quarter, where you're lucky enough to meet the youngest prince, Balin. He's creepy and probably definitely capable of murdering his siblings, and possibly also his father, but he really likes you. So, say you start seeing him, and he's your new patron. You have lots of sex and look pretty, while he does noble stuff. And say you actually end up getting pregnant. Well, you haven't made, right? It's his baby. Well, that depends. Let's say your baby is a girl. Balin takes one look at this baby and is rather upset. And so are you. This girl is the reason your own mother is a drunk. She's got one of her own. Dwarves inherit their caste from the same sex parent. You, Rika, are a girl. And this baby is a girl. This baby is as casteless as you. Balin decides this is not worth it and you're stuck. But now let's say that baby is actually a boy. That boy inherits Balin's caste. He is a noble, and that means he's technically in line for the dwarven throne. He is a prince, and you're a royal concubine. You get to gather up your family, and anyone who paid for the dress you're wearing, of course, and move into that royal palace. And that, for you, Rika, is jackpot. Boys, you're still out of luck, unless you're sleeping with casteless women too, because women of caste don't want to have casteless babies. Of course, this leads to a problem, namely lots of casteless people and not very many noble people, and since the casteless all live in Dusttown and most are linked to the Carter, there's not much incentive for them to stick around, is there? Why wouldn't they just go to the surface, depriving the nobility of noble hunters that are actually capable of having babies, and seeking a new life above and away from this incredibly awful system? Seriously, this has been a system crashing into the ground since the first blight. It is a ticking time bomb. Well, here is where that propaganda machine comes in. See, every Orzammar-dwarf worth his dirt knows that you will fall into the sky if you go to the surface. It is a rare dwarf who is unafraid and willing to test that rumour. Enter Dagna. Let's say you write a book, based on some old legends about people falling into the sky. Let's say this may actually be something substantially linked to the public psyche, because it may, at one time, even have happened, though no one really remembers when, and there's nothing in the memories to clear up the details, so it's all a bit vague. Let's say you embellish that story with a warning about greedy people and the collapse of an entire society. And let's say the guy writing it is a paragon, the sort of guy everyone respects, who's meant to be the epitome of what dwarves should be in all their architectural building, mute women's rights activist, coal-inventing, nug-eating, bad poetry writing, darkspawn-slaying ways. And say that paragon outranks even your king. Well, then you have the capacity to keep all of these people from going to the surface. So you get more babies, your caste system punishments stay the same, and everything continues in a nice traditionalist fashion. So, why are dwarves afraid of the sky? Well, on the one hand, someone definitely fell into a titan at one point. That happened, we just don't know the details. But the real reason they still believe it? Because dwarves are very traditional. and because they've been told to. So that's it for me, guys. If you like this video, check out my Tumblr page, the link is below, and I will only be answering comments I get there. You are welcome to drop me an ask anytime, or tag me in something whenever you feel like it. I do take requests on lore and meta, so if you have something you're curious about, do go ahead and ask. Thanks for watching.